Each year, the Product Agility podcast goes on tour. We get to go to some of the best conferences and interview some of the most influential speakers out there. And this year is no different. We kick off our Talks in 10 initiative for 2024 by visiting Lean Agile London. Lean Agile London is a fantastic community event which has a lot of soul and a lot of energy to it. They've also attracted some of the best speakers I've seen on a lineup for a long time. Over the next few days, we are going to be bringing you as many of these speakers' talks in 10 as we possibly can do. Each of his episodes will be recorded on the ground in the moment, so you may hear some background noise. I hope that adds to the ambience and makes it feel like you're there with us. This episode of the Product Agility Podcast is sponsored by Aha Slides, your solution for more engaging and productive team meetings. Transform your team's learning experience with Aha Slides AI-powered tools designed to quickly generate quizzes and interactive content. Boost engagement and efficiency in one go. Well, what more can you ask for? Visit ahaslides.com and use the exclusive discount code ProdAgility2024 to get 50% off of all yearly plans. Now, shall we get on to our talk in 10? Hello and welcome to the Product Agility Podcast. I'm Ben Maynard and I am a liar because I said that we were done with the talks in 10 and that simply isn't true because I was looking through my diary and was surprised to find that I'd forgotten about a couple of people, actually. Nothing personal. I just have really piss poor diary management. And so we are joined by someone that I knew before I even embarked upon a relationship with Lean Agile London. And his name is David Crow. And David is someone who is what's the word I'm looking for? Is an authority on many things, incredibly intelligent, very charming, and generally quite a nice chap. And his talk was at the same time as my talk, so I didn't get to see it. So David, thank you very much for giving up some of your time to come and do this talk in 10 with us.
No problem at all. It's good to be here, and it's always good to see you, Ben.
Ah, sweetheart. Right. I'll be nice to you now. I was always going to be nice. Now, your talk, let me make sure I get this right. It was The Stories We Tell, Understanding and Creating Organizational Pasts, Presents and Futures, which is quite an intriguing talk. So David, or talk title even. David, if you may, could you please give our listeners a little overview of what your talk was about, please?
Yeah, so I'm interested in narratives in organisations. That's what I'm doing my PhD on. And so I'm interested in how people use those narratives in order to tell stories in organisations. People have heard of different ways of doing this. So there's Weick, who in the 1970s was writing about a doomed firefighting team who could not make sense of their context and needed to use narratives in order to understand that. And because the narrative wasn't effectively communicated by their leadership, people ended up dying. It was quite the tragedy. Sense making has been picked up by other people as a key thing. I mean, most notably probably David Snowden, who is kind of known for that. But there are other theories out there. And one of the ones that I find quite compelling is David Boji, who has been writing about storytelling within organisations since about the 1970s in various forms. But in 2008 wrote a book called Storytelling Organisations, in which he identifies ways in which organisations are telling stories in order to make sense of pasts, presents and futures. And the reason they're not singular terms, i.e. there is an A, the past, there is an A, the present, there is an A, future, is because, of course, the stories that are being told are all going to be different depending on the perspective that people are telling them from. And he also divides that into narratives and stories. And he says that although people think of those as being synonyms, they're actually more like homonyms. They sort of sound like they're the same, but actually there should be some distinguishing between them. Not everybody agrees on this, but I think it's a useful distinction to make, right? So for him, narratives are things that are fixed. They're sort of well understood, they're coherent, and they normally consist of a single voice, which has a single logic to it, and which has a single center of control around it. So narratives are generally controlling. And the examples that we would give of this would be in the past mainly. And there's two major types of story here. There's the BME story, or the beginning, middle, end story. You know that one if you've watched Star Wars or Star Trek or any of those other type of shows. It's a classic narrative which has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, and it's quite satisfying. And of course, what an organisation's doing with that is it's telling its story. This is who we are as an organisation. This is where we came from. And these are the bits about our history that we will talk about, right? So there is this element of not merely controlling how people talk about it, but controlling what people talk about. And the other bit that sort of looks retrospectively at the organisation is the concept of a terse fragment. Now, a terse fragment is when somebody goes, I don't know, let's say you're working for a shoe company. Let's call them Nike for want of a better name. And you say to somebody else, well, we don't want another sweatshop incident. Okay. Now, what you haven't done there is told a whole narrative. And yet, if that person's sort of in the same group as you, they will understand exactly what that message means. Like, let's not repeat something in the past. For those of you who do like Star Trek, I refer to Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra when I talk about this. It encapsulates the entire fragment in a single story. The other time when we will tend to use narratives is when we're looking to the future. And Boji calls these anti-narratives, anti-A-N-T-E. So that has a dual meaning. It's both before, as in anti, but it's also placing a bet on what the future is going to look like. So you've got a double meaning of anti, not anti. And the point of a narrative is that you're being prospective and you're saying this is something that is going to be important to the organisation at some point in the future. So, for example, and I don't want to make assumptions about the tech industry, but I think a lot of people are having conversations that go, oh, let's put AI in it at the moment, however appropriate that may or may not be. So those are anti-narratives. We need AI in this because it's going to appeal to our market. How can we work that into it? And I think we know from looking at the market at the moment that some of those anti-narratives are pretty far out there bets that are being placed by people. So that's narratives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No.
So how, like, in your talk though, were you giving people tips and guidance on how to best employ this in their agile context?
So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with a narrative, right? However, they are quite controlling in the sense that they're trying to be centrifugal, which is to say they're sort of bringing them into the center of the circle. I think I actually mean centripetal, not centrifugal, but, let's run with this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, centripetal, towards the middle, right?
Okay.
So what you then have is something that is quite controlling. Now, in some ways, that's useful, right? Classic example here. We are going to use Scrum to run our teams. That means, therefore, our pattern is going to be, we're going to follow a set pattern. This is an anti-narrative. And we're also using terse fragments. We'll cover that in the retrospective, right? There's no whole narrative there, but it enables communication within the team. The problem with narratives is because they are single-voiced, single logic, single center, it's very much project-oriented, right? It's this entire one person has said that this is how it's going to be and this is how we're going to deliver it. So narratives are useful, but as agile practitioners, we need to be aware that they can actually be problematic.
Yeah, but that phrase that springs to mind is controlling the narrative.
Absolutely. That's exactly what people are trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's not just controlling the narrative in the sense that this is how we tell the story. It's also sort of saying we don't mention that part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're saying that we are going to do, I don't know, let's take two examples here. We will always have user researchers separate from the team because where I used to work, that's what worked and it will work here. And no one can publicly dissent to that because that is a narrative and we can't talk around it. The other one would be the classic, we're going to use Scrum and it's going to go like this. Everyone may be thinking other stuff, but that's going to be very private dissent because a narrative is being controlled around a single point of control.
Yeah. And the thing about those narratives is they can give rise to what I call pseudo-dialogue. So dialogue's what we're doing right now, right? There's a bit of give and take. We're talking about things. It's very human interaction. Pseudo-dialogue is when it sounds like dialogue, but when you sort of drill down, it's one voice speaking. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience of being in a management meeting, like the town hall meeting, and a manager makes a statement, or the company is doing incredibly well. And then somebody asks a question and a different manager answers, but it's effectively the same answer. Right? There's no variation. They've practiced what they're saying. This pseudo dialogue happens all the time in organizations where people think that it's interactive and that it's a dialogue, but it's just one person speaking, or it's a bunch of people doing improv around what they think the hippo in the room wants to say, right? It's a little bit of, oh, we think Fred will like this. So, of course, this sets us up with a problem. As agilists, controlling the narrative is sort of not really what we do, right? We are more interested in stories, and stories are incomplete. Stories have lots of voices, so that they're polyvocal. They have many centers to them. There's lots of people who have got an interest in them. And they're also polylogical. So you do get input from developers, you get input from testers, you get input from UX designers, etc., etc. All of this is going on within a story, and stories don't have this beginning, middle, end structure. There's no defined meaning to them. They're not coherent. They're not even finished, right? Like they're just a thing that people are going to then play with to see if it's got legs. Will it become a narrative? And there are three sorts of stories that we can talk about. Simultaneities. This is a little bit difficult to explain, so I'm going to talk about a play.
Okay.
There's a play called Tamara in Los Angeles. I think it's the longest running play, assuming it's still running in Los Angeles. And it is based on 12 characters, and it's in a physical house which has 12 rooms in it. And you, as an observer, choose which rooms you go to at which stage during the play. So you could be following a particular character to another room. You could just stay in one room. You could just be a bit more random than that. Now, of course, what that means is you've got no way of knowing the whole story because it's happening simultaneously in all the rooms the entire time. And with that number of characters, there's some ridiculously high number. I want to say something like 127 million possible combinations that you could watch of that play, right? That's just 12 rooms and 12 characters. How many employees do you have in your company, and how many meetings are they having a day? So how many stories are emerging from that in a way which is essentially uncontrollable by management?
Yeah.
So that's a simultaneity. There's the embodied things. This is sort of related to that tacit knowledge side of things. It's the entire... I'm sure you've done this as an agilist, where you've gone into a meeting and about halfway through, you recognize the patterns of some of the dysfunctions that are happening there. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to need to do intervention A or intervention B, or perhaps I will ask powerful question X at some point during this to see what the reply is. That's very embodied. I talk about when I worked on ambulances, and you sort of got the feeling of like you would see somebody and know what was wrong with them, despite the fact that you didn't have any of the data yet. You'd just seen the pattern before, sort of thing. And then finally, there's the emotive ethical. If you've ever watched daytime TV, then you'll be familiar with little Sheila, the donkey who has to walk 10,000 miles every day just to get a bucket of water. And if you give just £5 a month, you can save Sheila. That's an emotive ethical story, right? Because Sheila's clearly not a real character. I mean, she's a donkey for starters. But it's also made to get you to make an ethical decision based on a moment of emotionality. And this happens in organisations as well, right? It's an opportunity for a company to do some good. So those little stories are where we do all our work as Agilists in my book. We are listening to those simultaneous stories. We're getting a gut feel with the teams about what's going on. And in order to do that, we need to listen to tensions, what we might call in fancy language dialectics. For example, are there changes happening in the team which aren't being reflected in the conversation? Is there a difference between who they were and who they are, and they're trying to match the two up? I mean, the example there would be McDonald's, of course. I say of course, but, Ronald McDonald lost quite a lot of weight in 2004 just after Super Size Me came out. And yet you've got an organisation that's trying to present it as the same Ronald McDonald, right? So you've got an identity there where you've got sameness. It's still Ronald McDonald, but there's also clearly difference. He has become a children's fitness coach in the last year, which is pretty impressive.
That's impressive. That's a big turnaround. Considering that Super Size Me turns out he was an alcoholic, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, he just died.
He just died, rest his soul. Right, no, not speaking ill of a dead, but it turned out that Super Size Me, it wasn't, no one could recreate the same results as he had because he was boozing at the same time.
But a well-defined narrative and a counter-narrative, of course, from McDonald's. Oh, there's a whole bunch of...
interesting.
And the other thing that we can listen for is where we have dialogisms, which is literally, are we hearing multiple voices in our conversations or are we stuck with pseudo-dialogue? So those different voices might be, have we got style happening as well as voice as well as text? So when you're giving a presentation, is what you're hearing matching up with what you're seeing and the way the person's acting? Right? All of those are important combinations. Or... if we're thinking about agile teams, is there a difference in cadences between teams or even between team members? Are they expecting different things? That difference in cadence and locale can really impact effectiveness.
Oh, mate, do you know what? I find this really interesting. And I'm also know we're running out of time. And it's really...
I was worried we would.
Yeah, and what I've been thinking, we had a great episode, actually one of our best performing episodes ever by Tara Wellington. And... Tara was talking about storytelling as a product manager. And now I'm not going to make any promises. Tara is coming back on. We are just being rubbish. We're playing LinkedIn ping pong at the moment. But what I'm wondering is, David, if you do ever fancy listening to that episode and you think and you piqued your interest, I'm wondering if maybe we could explore the opportunity to do something a bit more in depth on storytelling from some of the product angle as well. Because I think that one of the great things I learned from Radhika Dutt, was a great product vision. You shouldn't mean that everyone has to tell the same story. Everyone should be able to articulate what it means to them from their perspective, but you're still working towards the same thing because actually it's created so much emotional resonance with them. They see how, in their own words, and with a product vision or organizational vision, it doesn't matter if you're all explaining it in different ways as long as it's all heading towards the same place. And I think that's and I would love to explore some of that with you, but we are over time, David. I'm sorry, my friend.
Stuff.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And let's obviously we'll stay in touch and we can explore some other opportunities. I'm wondering if people want to find out more about this or anything else from you, they can check you out on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Check me out on LinkedIn, drop me a message if there's something particular. And I believe that the videos are going to be up for the talk soon. So.
Yes. Fingers crossed. So yeah, but what we'll do is we'll put David's LinkedIn link into the description. Also in the description there's a link to Boget's sense-making registries of narrative and story, so you can kind of get to see a graphic for some of what David explained. And then when the videos are released, we will be making our listeners and followers on LinkedIn aware of this. So make sure you do follow us on LinkedIn so you can be made aware when the videos from Leonardo London are released. So you can see David's talk. You can see some other great people's talks as well, such as Shelby and Henriette, as Elaine Tita Negro Correra, who have one of our best performing episodes for ages. Or if you really wanted to see one, you could even watch mine. But, you know, that's...
well, I need to watch that because I didn't get to watch it.
There you go, yeah. I need to watch yours. So we're both winning. David, thank you very much, my friend, and thank you everyone for listening. Who knows, there may be at least one more Talking 10 from Leonardo London popping up, or maybe not. I'm not going to make any promises either way. But be sure to stay tuned because we're back with more episodes of this quality at least very soon. So thank you very much for listening. And David, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Ben. Have a great day.